It's called Visiting a Mountain Recluse, and it's a painting that was painted by Shirakura Jihô. And the real reason why I chose it, to just get on the base of it all, because if anyone in the room knows much about Asian art or particularly Japanese art, you'll have to forgive me, because my knowledge is quite superficial, and I use it as I want to. No one's quizzing me on it. I don't have to take a test, and I use it for my own work as it works for me. The traditions that this painting is sort of tapping into and continuing is as old as like 303, and it's a Japanese painting, which I was excited by because I love Japanese art and I source it frequently in my own work. So it seemed rather simple for me to sort of say, oh well, this is great. I work with ink and I love this, and the subject matter is really interesting as it relates to the other painting I want to talk about. But little did I realize that its history was going to be so unbelievably unique and deep. But primarily what I was most interested in is the sort of central figures in the hut there, which is supposedly a gentleman who would be a scholar, who is a recluse and is living alone in the mountains, taking in nature and observing it, probably doing calligraphy about it, probably painting about it, and very likely writing poetry about it. The other person is there to visit him, to learn from him, and what have you. And I thought that was a really beautiful corresponding tale to the Agnes Martin painting, which we will go see when I'm done talking about this, who is a 20th century American artist. Actually, she's Canadian, but lived in America, and basically chose a life of a recluse to be able to focus herself on nature and her inner peace and the inner poetry that she needed to concentrate on to be able to make artwork that in her mind was very pure. So I thought just plainly out of the content of this work and the lifestyle of the second painter that there was a really interesting relationship there. But the point of the literati painting, to just try to get to this as soon as possible, is that it's a really unbelievably beautiful combination of poetry, calligraphy, and landscape painting. And this would be considered a very formal literati piece. By 1929, literati painting in Japan had already gone through its own stereotyping, its own sort of boring copying of itself. Nobody was really reinventing things. And so there became a movement by artists, including this artist, to really formalize to really pay attention to kind of create guidelines and rules by which they could elevate the process and sort of break out of the stereotypes. And so by 1929, in the 20s and 30s, a whole new and quite exciting world of literati painting happens in Japan. I'm very attracted to the sort of the abstract qualities that happen because it's not a highly contrasted piece, and that it becomes quite difficult to, if you were to just cut out the top left-hand corner, I don't really know for sure that we would know what was going on there. It becomes very impressionistic, and I think that is really beautiful. I also, though, love how it just then sits in such a realism, though, too. It becomes cartoon-like. There's these two men there. I mean, I just think the combination of the abstract and the figurative is really quite exceptional. In this, you would have to think of the confidence that it takes to make all of these lines, and that it goes through all the way back to 300 to be taught how to have the confidence to make that one singular long stroke to create what we know as the arabesque form of a rock or the arabesque form of a tree. And I just think that is something that, although it seems in a way very simple and almost humble and slightly naive, it is in fact it is this sort of exalted level of mastery that creates something like this to have perfect harmony. And I think that in a way that is really what all of the paintings, a lot of the literati landscape paintings are trying to express, which is another reason why there's a really interesting connection to Agnes Martin, because although her work was very abstract, I think she also believed that it was a reflection or the embodiment of a perfect thought in her mind that came out, and that the paintings were in this way like the result of like a very long and practiced sort of meditation on simplicity, essentialism, and no BS. So it brings me to Agnes Martin. She was a very complicated woman in a way, because she was quite philosophical in the way that she saw painting and what it meant to her and the sort of foundations of her life that it were built on. And in that regard, it also is an element of the Chinese and the Japanese calligrapher painter that I think is quite similar. That even living in New Mexico, she would spend days, in the hills and in the mountains painting, and then when she would come back home, she would find herself in the plain, and she said, "The plains are just so perfect to me. The horizontal line is my favorite line." I started to notice that the horizontal line not only reminded me of of the plains, but it reminded me of the ocean, and it also reminded me of singing. And at that point, she does almost completely go to the horizontal sort of obsession. Prior to this, there were many more grids at work. She was sort of finding her language through the non-representational qualities of grids, the fact that the grid is also kind of perfectly democratic. There is no hierarchy in a grid. In that regard, it becomes an interesting metaphor for the sort of dissemination of ego as well. So the first works are very grid forms, but the later works are almost entirely horizontal lines. She was, by most terminology and sort of art historical kind of language, a minimalist, because she was very much interested in the reduction to absolute essentialism. Rarely does the work get much brighter than this. The paint rarely gets much thicker. The hues sometimes she died in 2004. This is from 1980. It's called Untitled, number 15. There were some after this, which I like quite a bit. They're some of my favorites, and they're also some of my favorite titles. Like, I believe they're called like Loving Love and Loving, where the pinks get a little bit brighter and the yellows get a little bit more kind of Easter egg colored. But they still stay in a very breathy tone, and this is all in aid of talking about her sort of minimalist qualities. However, what made her complicated, one of the things that is complicated about her, though, is that she didn't really, philosophically speaking, she didn't line up so much with the kind of hard ideals of the minimalists. She believed totally that it was absolutely the painting as a result and a complete and lovely metaphor for like the most beautiful moments in your life. And I think in that regard, if anyone were to ever really like her, that is one of the reasons to really love her work. It is sort of stunningly optimistic. And I think that what she's trying to do for us is to help look at these paintings with also nothing to say, which is why it's ironic that I'm talking so much in front of them. That they are not about language, they are not about words, they're not about nature, but they are about a feeling of perfection that we all have had at any point in our daily lives, that we may or may not be wise enough or attuned enough to take notice of. I think that this painting should not be talked about necessarily. It should be looked at for a very long time, but maybe you can come back and look at it someday.